I am very passionate about bedtime stories for children, how valuable it is for children to read at bedtime, to have that one-to-one alone time with an adult. The act of sharing a book with children, and it makes such a difference.
Greetings and welcome to the Creative Writing Wizard podcast, where we talk with published authors and writers to learn more about them, their books, and the writing process to become better writers ourselves. Today, I am joined by published author Frances Wong. Welcome to the podcast, Frances.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been watching a little bit on Instagram. You've got some really interesting posts, which we'll dig into. If you could do a little introduction of yourself for those who maybe don't know you.
So I've been writing forever, since I was absolutely tiny. I don't actually remember when I first started writing. So I've always wanted to be a writer ever since I was little. But I was discouraged from being a writer. So I didn't pursue it as a career. I wanted to go into creative writing or journalism or something so I could use writing as a skill. And it didn't end up going that way. So I went into media and then I went into teaching. So I've been a teacher for 20 years. And when my children were born, so my daughter was born in 2016, I really started taking writing a lot more seriously. And I started writing my Lexi Walker book. And that's when I really took it really seriously. And I was really trying to get my book out there. And then I started learning about self-publishing. And I was really interested in all of the elements of self-publishing. And that's when I decided I'm going to self-publish this book.
How have you found self-publishing? Because, like, for those who are maybe more familiar with the different styles, there's like self-publishing, hybrid publishing, and traditional publishing. Did you pursue the traditional publishing route at all, or as soon as you heard about self-publishing, you're like, no, this is for me?
I did query first. I've been querying, for years and years. But I didn't really know much about self-publishing, and I think in the past self-publishing hasn't always had the best reputation, and I think that put me off a little bit to start with. But as I learnt more and more about it, I realised that it was something that I actually was interested in, and something I thought, I can actually do this. It's actually a viable route into publishing, and there's lots of very successful and very good indie published, self-published authors. So that's why I went that route. I didn't go the hybrid route because I thought it's cost as well, and if I'm paying for costs myself, then I can choose what the costs are. So I didn't go the hybrid route, and I just went straight to self-publishing, and it's been really interesting. I've made lots of friends and lots of connections on the internet through threads and through the bad place, and to meet people who are also self-publishing. And it's been interesting. I mean, I think everyone's dream is not everybody's dream actually. There's a lot of self-published authors who would never try the traditionally published route, and I think perhaps I think this is the best route for me actually as well.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. And I think you touched on a number of items. So first off is you touched on how there has been this kind of like stigma against indie publishers and self-published, as if someone chooses to do that, it's not as good, which is really fascinating to me. And this whole process this last year has been really informative of there are tons of excellent writers who just choose to publish it themselves.
Yeah.
And there's also this misassociation of if you self-publish that it's not edited, which is also totally not the case.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on that actually a little bit is with your own writing, you print out your full manuscript and then you take pen and I think even multiple colors of pen and write down in the margins and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how you kind of grew into that?
Yeah, I think it might come from teaching because a lot of my day is spent grading papers, marking books. So I think a lot of it could come from that. It's what I'm used to doing. And I feel like I'm much more self-critical when it's printed than if it's on the computer screen. Because I don't know. I don't know if it's something about reading on paper or if it's something about reading on the screen where I can't see the mistakes as much. I think I might be, I don't know, I could possibly be very slightly dyslexic, and I think reading on the screen is a lot more difficult than reading on paper. But I do find it a lot easier, and with a pen I feel like it's a very tactile experience as well, and I'm really delving into the book rather than just doing a surface edit. I do feel like it's very surface level when I do it on the screen. I know it's different for everyone. Everyone's process is different, and Like, it's not, mine's better than that. No, of course not. But it works for me. And I prefer reading physical books. I did have a Kindle phase as well, but I prefer reading books on paper now. And I think it just makes it a more visceral experience because I'm touching it as well. And like, I'm scribbling it out. There was one page where I think the only word I left on the page was laughed. I think the whole thing was pink because I edit in pink mainly. And yeah, I think it just makes it more real for me, I think.
You mentioned you've been, dabbling with writing for quite some time. Can you talk a little bit about how you finally decided that, maybe this is something that you do and like started to write your books, which, correct me if I'm wrong, you have 3 books out and another one on the way at the time of this recording. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Well, I've always been writing stories ever since I was absolutely tiny. I've got these little plastic sellotape books made out of paper that I made when I was like 5 or something, super tiny. So it's always been part of me, and I've always been writing a story. But I don't think I've ever took it seriously. And it was when my children were born and I was at home for maternity leave, and I actually thought, oh, I'd really quite like to be a stay-at-home author and be with my children and try and make a proper go of this and actually submit. I had submitted stories to for query before when I was much younger, in my 20s, and we got through to the purchasing person, but it didn't get any further than that. So then I thought, you know what, I'm really going to work on a query. I'm going to Google everything about query letters. I'm going to really work hard on these books. And then when that didn't come through for me, I learnt more about self-publishing and realised that was the route I wanted to go through. So then I had to save up for a cover, I had to save up for editing, and it all took time. It took me 6 years to write the first Lexi Walker book as well, because I kept changing it and not liking it. And in the first book, they never left the planet, and in the final version, they go to the moon. So it's all evolving and changing and becoming what it ended up being in the end. And I think it worked out pretty good, I think. But yeah, it was a very long process, and I learnt a lot through the process. I think the first time I queried, it was before I went to Hong Kong, so I must have been in my early 20s, 21. And then when I finally published my first Lexi Walker book, I was 39. So it was a very long process. A lot of me evolving, putting myself out there and trying to be more confident, trying to shake off that imposter syndrome that we all have, and to really like embrace the writer part of me and say, this is what I'm going to do with my life and this is what I want.
I really dig that. Yeah, and definitely I feel like there's 2 elements there that I guess before I got into writing seriously, that I didn't really realize or think about. The first that you touched on is how hard it is to get an agent and to get published. Like, I knew it was a challenge, but learning more about how people, query up to like 100 times per book, and then they have, maybe some offers, but usually it's a lot of rejections. That's definitely given me a lot more respect of authors, both for those who have tried and then decided, you know what, this isn't the route for me, as well as those who have, gone on to traditionally publish. It's like, it's quite the gauntlet. But the second part that you talked about is about the imposter syndrome, which I really appreciate that a lot of authors have kind of, voiced that of themselves. It's not something that you really see from the page perspective. You're like, oh, wow. Even as I was reading, your first book in the Lexi series, I was like, this is really good. But I don't see the imposter, that side of things. And it's like, yeah, I appreciate that when authors are transparent about it, because it's like, I feel like as authors, we need to be more outspoken about, it is hard to write a story. But like you took that though, and you're like, you know what? I'm gonna, as you say, I'm gonna make a go of it. If I can borrow the Britishism, and then you've got multiple stories published. I guess, can you talk about how did that progress then? So you said around 6 years to get the first one published. Did you find that process was any different for book 2 and 3?
Oh, incredibly different. So during writing Lexi Walker, the first one, I read How to Save a Cat, and I read Story Genius and Story Engineering. At first, I tried to follow Story Genius exactly, and tried to plan the first Lexi Walker book through that. Didn't work for me at all. It was too prescriptive and too rigid and too detailed. And then I read Story Engineering, which then broke up the ending of the book for me. My problem with writing has always been a saggy middle. My middle has always been boring, it's been wandering, it's never had a purpose. But then when I read Story Engineering, I found the midpoint, and then now my middles work towards a midpoint and away from a midpoint towards the climax, and it all makes so much more sense now. And I always use the save the cat, it's called save the cat beats for my books, so that I can organize them. But I don't write it in lots of detail, because some people do like a 20,000 word outline, and that's not me. That's great for them, but it's not for me. So I do post-it notes, like I call them my signposts. So as I'm writing my book, I follow the signpost to make sure I get to the destination. And I follow word counts now as well, to make sure that it fits. I mean, it doesn't always quite fit, but so that the midpoint is actually midway through the book as well. And that, I never did that before. I was a complete free writer when I first wrote the first couple drafts of Lexi Walker's story. And there was no destination, there was no climax, I had a picture in my head of what I thought the story would look like, but it didn't have a purpose, it didn't have a meaning. Lexi didn't have a flaw to her that needed to be addressed in the story. The character arc wasn't there. So in those 6 years, I was learning about character arc, plot arcs, story beats, and all that, and putting it all together. And that's why I have the book that I have now, and hopefully, she says, all the books follow that same pattern. That's how it's evolved, and that's how it's changed, because it wasn't like that at the start, and none of my other previous books have been like that at the start. So it's been a big learning process, but it's one I would recommend to all authors.
I've heard a number of times of the Save the Cat method, which I need to check out myself, because I am also a plotter, as the community likes to call it. The style I tend to go about, I think, is called like the snowflake method, which I think is fairly similar to Save the Cat. But can you talk a little bit about your sticky note process? Because I've seen a few pictures you've shared on Instagram of like the kinds of details that you put up there. Because one of the things I found interesting is that even like as you and I are, maybe coming from the same experience of being plotting and like planning out and doing structures before we get into writing. Even within that, like the way that you approach it versus the way that I approach it versus, one of the other guests that I've had on before who also outlined, it's fascinating to me to see like how different of processes there are, and how people can kind of like take little bits and pieces. So how do you get started? And then how do you turn that idea into like kind of a cohesive story plan?
The first thing I do is I put the beats up on my board. So it's like a label for the beats. So everything's up there. And then as I get an idea or a scene picture in my head, I put the post-it on there so that it can come in any order. But I sort of look at the post-it and I go, would that be breaking into 3, or would that be fun and games? And then those are the beats from Save the Cat. So then I place it next to those. So it doesn't particularly have an order. It's sort of a random thought. And I'll sit in front of my board and I'll be staring at it going, what's going to happen in this book? What do I want to happen? What do I see happening? Because the next one I'm going to be plotting is the 5th one, the final book in Lexi's story. And it's hopefully it's going to be huge. And so I want every scene to be impactful and really big. So it's already forming in my brain. So my post-its are now being written while I'm editing the 4th book. And it's just random. It's just random. I put them where I think they need to go. They do move. And sometimes they get binned if they end up not matching what the next following ones are. It's a very like flexible, very moving, very malleable process. It doesn't stick. And it can even change as I'm writing. If I'm writing it and go, oh, that scene doesn't fit now because now I've said that they're doing this. So now I've got to change that. But I do colour code it as well. So Lexi's are always purple because that's my favourite colour. And Tim's are blue because that was another post-it colour I had. And my bad guys are pink because they're red. Not pink, but I don't have red post-it, so they're pink. And it lets me know what each character is doing in each part of the story as well, so I can get a big overview. I like to see a big picture. I like to see everything in one place, so that helps as well, using my big boards and available on Amazon. So it's a very like malleable process, and it doesn't change from the post-its, so it'll just stay as post-its until I start writing, and then when I've written the first draft, it's always an absolute mess, and I move scenes around that don't actually fit there, or that would be better if it started earlier, or that would be better if it happened after this big thing. So then the scenes move around again, and I get some more post-its. I love my post-its. I'm not on commission, I promise. And so I write every scene. I write every scene out on a post-it, and I order them around what their order is at the time, and then I follow the story through, and I check, is that still working, and then other scenes will be moved again. So it's all the very, I like an overview. I like to use an overview for everything. Even at work, I use an overview so that I can get the big picture, and then I can narrow in after that.
I like that. Yeah, and I like the idea of having the ability to move items around, which I find like when I write it in, like for me, I'm gonna get a lot of hate from this. I use Google Docs just because I like things on the cloud and it's easy. But when I write it out and I try to move stuff around, I find it's a lot harder to like to see visually like where things fit in. So I might have to try that out. I know I've tried like a similar concept for like project planning, but never for my own writing. So that's really cool. And then can you talk a little bit about how the Lexi story came about? Because it's like I can see some kind of inspirations or ties into maybe moments in your own life, or even in some of the things that you've talked about on Threads. But you can talk about specifically this story. How did you come about with the idea of having these characters go through the arcs that they did?
Well, there was a little girl in my class called Lexi, and Lexi Walker is based on her. I'm good friends with her mum as well, and she just happened to be in my class. And her mum knows that she's based on that little girl. And while I was just in class and I was doing my lesson, I just had this picture in my head of two children flying in space in a spaceship. So then I started, this is story engineering, but then I started doing the why questions. Why are they in a spaceship? Why are they flying it? Where are they going? What are they going to do? And it all came from this one picture in my head of two children in a spaceship flying somewhere. And then everything else came from it, like, where did they get a spaceship from? Well, they must have met some aliens. So why did they meet aliens? And how did they get on the spaceship? And what prompted them to find the aliens? And then it just all evolved from that one picture in my head. And when I was thinking of a character for that picture, and then I was just teaching as you do, and my mind's wandering, and I saw, Lexi is a great name for a kid. Oh, and she'd be a great adventurer as well. And that's how she got written into the story. But she's never actually heard the story, though, because she was too young at the time for me to read it to the class. So I don't know if she's read it, but her mum, I chatted with her mum about it, and she goes, oh, that was nice.
That's super cute. Yeah, it's something we talked about a little bit on Threads about how you can take stories that have a lot of emotional depth and impact, but then put it in terms and in a setting that's applicable to younger kids. Maybe in this case, Lexi was too young at the time, but I'd be curious about how do you approach that? Like, so we used the example on Threads talking about Bluey for the example of, like, it's a kid's show,
yeah.
but parents can enjoy it from one perspective, but also like the themes and messages within it can be like really heavy hitting. And like I personally found that when I was reading the first in the Lexi series, and it was like it was intense, and I felt like the story really pick up, and like there was like there were stakes and there was risk, but there was also like a certain safety element of like I feel like I could read this to my kid when he's a little bit older. He's maybe a bit young and at the time, but can you talk a little bit about how do you approach writing a story that has like that level of emotional impact, but to target or to be, let's say, emotionally appropriate for the readers that you're trying to write a story for?
There are a couple rules with kidlit. Things like if it's a very, very dangerous situation, you have an adult on hand nearby. If it's a dangerous situation, you have a friend nearby as well. So you never leave your main character alone with the bad guy. They're supposed to be emotionally supported or physically supported by somebody in the story. And they need to be prepared by a mentor in the story. So there are, I said rules, but really it's sort of a storytelling for children, because we do, even though they start at the age that my book is written, they start to pull away from their parents and start relying on their friends a bit more, and they start pulling away from their mentors and focusing on friends. So it's to say to children, even if you are grown up and you don't need your mum and dad anymore, you can still rely on an adult when you need to. But then it's also giving the children agency to then step away from the adult and defeat the bad guy by themselves, but not for a long period of time, if that makes sense. So when Lexi confronts the bad guy, I can't say who it is because it's a twist, but confronts the bad guy at the end of the story, Tim is there with her, so she's never alone. And then when it's that pivotal moment when, trying not to reveal the ending too much, but when it's that pivotal moment when the mantle is handed over and the next person has to confront the bad guy, there's that sort of preparation, that talk first, to make sure that they have everything they need moving forward and they have everything they need to tackle the final task. And then even when they're at the end, they're not really on their own. Like in Harry Potter, Dumbledore flies in straight away after Harry's defeated the bad guy to come and support there. So in my book, I had Captain Blast, who Lexi doesn't like, come and support her with her, like, the very, very end. So she's not alone then again. So it's always making sure that there is an adult on hand, not necessarily with agency, because we want the children to have the agency, but with that support and that safety net for them, so that they're not in too much peril. And there's also like obvious things like no gore, no gore and no yucky bits in there for children, which is tricky when I like reading Game of Thrones and things like that. But it's good to give children alarming, distressing situations so that they can think, what would I do if I was in that situation? Or, oh, they handled it that way, I might handle it the same way, or I might handle it a different way. So they've got experiences of difficult situations, high tension situations, so they're not, so it helps to prepare them for the future with it being safe as well.
That's one of the things that led me to want to bring you on the podcast. Is I feel like the way that you're approaching writing the story, it's more than just a story. It's like it's a story with purpose, and like you write it with intentionality, and you can really tell that when you read the story. There's a lot of thought that went into it. There's a lot of time, a lot of effort, which as a fellow author and as a parent, I appreciate. The thing that I would be curious about is how have you felt like your teaching as a primary teacher has informed your writing process? And then, like, even as you've mentioned on social sometimes, of how you watch others, specifically children, and how they're exploring stories and how that inspires you in your own stories.
I think reading so many books with children really helps me to get into that mindset of writing for children. I think if I wrote for adults, they'd be very naive books, I think. So I always thought if I wrote for children, I could make it something that was ambitious for them. And I think reading some of the books where they're not ambitious for children, and I think, oh, but children can handle this. You could have used the word enormous instead of the word big. They can do that. So I wanted to write something that was for children, that was ambitious and challenging, but not in a way that would put them off, but in a way that would show them they can succeed. Because I think one of the things Lexi says is that anyone can do anything if you put your mind to it. You can always succeed. And I think that's the message I want to give children, because resilience is so important for children. And if they feel as if I keep trying, I can do this, like Lexi does, like Tim does, especially because he's got a very negative self-image and he finds it very difficult to put himself forward. And when he does succeed, I think that's so important for children to see that if you don't give up and if you put yourself out there, that you can do it. And resilience is something we do see in schools where children find that challenging to be resilient and have a go even when it's difficult. So it is something that I want to promote for children and make it like, you can do it. I believe in you.
That's great. I really like that. It's always fascinating to hear really how many authors have this I don't know how to say it, like a subcurrent. That's the word that's coming to my mind of like there's something here that's like a deeper level of caring. I remember it came up in one of my conversations um, with Amanda when she's writing about superheroes, for the example. Like on paper, you can see, superheroes and the good old beat 'em up stories and heroes and villains and all that good stuff. But in between those moments, there's like a lot of depth and a lot of character arcs and a lot of like real emotions, which is something that I found when I was reading your book, where it's like you really saw how Lexi came into some new situation, and then she's trying to figure out how to like wrap her mind around it. She's trying to figure out, what do I do with this now? And then you have her counterpart kind of like questioning and like bringing up the opposite side of things and acting as a really good character foil. How did you find it in terms of making the characters like relatable? And because in this setting you're dealing with science fiction, and there's like elements that you're making up out of nothing, but at the same time it still feels fairly grounded. So like how did you balance that?
I have to admit, I did Google how to write relatable characters, if I'm perfectly honest. So there was a bit of research in that, and I was reading lots of people's blogs and lots of writers and lots of information on how to write books with good character arcs. And I bought books that were specifically about character arcs, so I looked into it in a great detail, because one of the feedbacks I had from an agent was that the character wasn't relatable. So I wanted to really, really work on that. And unfortunately, and Disney's got it right here, making them an orphan makes them relatable. This is what my research turned up. So that's why poor Lexi is an orphan, and giving her a difficulty. So she's got a horrible uncle, and that's one of the things. So people are like, "Oh, I'd leave her alone," and making sure that she stands up for the right things, and she's standing up for people who are downtrodden, even though she comes across as a little bit downtrodden herself. And that sort of thing makes characters relatable. And I would like to say it's not a formula, but it seems as if it is a little bit of like that they are downtrodden, that they are good, inherently good. They always try to do their best. They always strive to be good. Even if you have a morally grey character, those things can also show up in their character as well. So yes, Google and lots of books helped me with that. And then I started writing Lexi, and she sort of came out a bit more naturally. So once I'd done my research and absorbed it all, I feel like she sort of evolved herself a little bit, and I thought, well, what would she do, and how would she react to this, and then she's also got Tim naysaying in her ear all the time, and I think if she can carry on despite someone telling her that she can't constantly, I think that's showing resilience as well, which is one of the things I like to go on and on about. But it's I think that's how you create the relatable characters. I think. I hope they're relatable.
Yeah, I would say so. And you kind of touched on an interesting point around let's say the formulas of writing. Something that I found interesting is, let's say, in a slightly different but similar vein, is the when people are comparing their work to others or comps. Sometimes I see authors talk about, my story is too close to A and B. I have the same thing from a different type of series, or even like fanfic when you take certain elements. But what's interesting though is, even though you mentioned some of the things that are maybe part of that formula, the thing that I find fascinating is even if you give people the exact portions of an equation in terms of writing, like how they come out to the end and like what that story looks like is so
Mm-hmm.
different, like from one person to
Yeah.
another. So even if you gave them, like they're in this setting, this is their history, this is the character. If you just let two different people try to write something, the end is going to be so different, and like how they get there is so different.
Yeah.
So that's what I find super interesting, and like how people approach writing and like the stories that they choose to write, which actually kind of ties me into the next question, which is I noticed that you have a Christmas story or a holiday themed. Can you talk a little bit about how you went into that? Because I would say it's very different in vibe from the sci-fi adventure kind of thing that you've got going on with
Yeah.
Lexi.
Yeah, it is. I had this book in my head for ages, but because I was writing Lexi Walker, I didn't write it. So I had this book in my head for years, and I think I pretty much wrote it 3 or 4 times in my head before I actually got to write it. And I was taking an editing break from Lexi Walker because the all the books say that you're supposed to take like 2 to 4 weeks off from your manuscript so that you come back to it with fresh eyes. And I come back to it with very fresh eyes because I forget everything. So I'm going, oh, did I say they were doing that? Oh, awesome. So then my editing I think gets better because of that. And I get fidgety and I get anxious if I'm not writing. So then I started writing Tasha's Christmas Wish, and it just sort of poured out. And I wrote the whole thing in 3 months, and edited it, and it was ready. It's much shorter. It's only 30,000 words, but it was because I've written it so many times and I had it in my head. I did try writing it in the summer and that didn't work at all. So when Christmas came round, I just sat from December or somewhere in November until February and just wrote the whole thing, and it all just poured out. And it was, I mean, it does follow the threes formula. So like in children's literature, they have 3 tries and then something else happens, and it's the rule of threes. So she does have the rule of threes in the story, so it does follow like a story pattern for young children. Yeah, so that's how that came about. It's just a story I've had in my head for such a long time, and it's one of my children's favourites. They keep asking me to write a sequel. I said I don't really have a sequel in me, but but they love Tasha's Christmas Wish because it's silly and it's Christmas and it's magical. And Christmas is my favourite time of year, I think, with the trees and the sparkles and everything, and just everyone's being cheerful, and you get to have lots of mulled wine. And yeah, so and I love Christmas, so I wrote a Christmas book, and it's got nothing to do with Lexi Walker in any way at all. It's not sci-fi. It's just a silly seasonal fantasy story, but I think the themes are the same from Lexi to Tasha, because Tasha is terrified of heights. But the only way to save Christmas is to climb to the top of the Christmas tree and get magic from the star. So she's got to be resilient. She's got to push herself further than she's gone before. She's got to really become who she really is to save Christmas. Otherwise, nobody's getting any presents. So it's more about that resilience, more about that determination, more about that one person doing something to make a difference.
So I guess you're looking forward now, so you have a few of the Lexi books out. Can you talk a little bit about like where you're at now and where you kind of see yourself going in the next, let's say, few months to a year?
So Lexi Walker's my next one. Book 4, it's called Edge of Time, Lexi Walker and the Edge of Time, and it's in the editing process at the moment, and I'm talking with a cover designer who's doing my cover for me. And I'm just plodding through. I'm editing it in a different way that I've edited before. Normally I just go straight the way through the book start to finish so that I can make sure it makes sense chronologically. But this time I'm going through Lexi's POV, and then I'm going through Tim's POV because I want to check that their scenes flow seamlessly all the way through. And then I'm going to do a next layer of editing once I've finished this, and just do the whole thing straight the way through so that the end of Tim's scenes lines up properly with the start of Lexi's scenes. They're in 2 different locations. I don't want to give too much away, but they're in 2 different locations. But what's happening to Tim mirrors a bit what's happening to Lexi. in very opposite ways. Lexi's very safe where she is. Tim's in absolute danger where he is. So it's trying to like show, oh dear, the worst thing that's happening to Lexi is that she's got someone she doesn't like on her team. And the worst thing that's happening to Tim is he doesn't know if he's going to survive the day or not. So it's trying to balance that out and make sure it matches. But yeah, so checking every scene follows first and then checking the juxtaposition after that. Sorry, I do like editing. I do talk about editing quite a bit.
That's awesome. Well, you are. I mean, I would say in a minority of people who enjoy editing, because I'd say a lot of authors, they really enjoy the drafting process of, yeah, I get to do something, and then they go back through and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
boy, here we go. So that's awesome though,
Yeah.
because we need there to be more people like you who actually enjoy the editing process.
Well, I'm on the second draft now, so I'm editing the second draft now rather than the first draft, so it's not so bad anymore. When it was the first draft, I was like, oh lordy, what was I writing? But now I'm on second draft, so it's much more chill, much more like checking things.
It's always funny to see people react to, there's that first draft of, yeah, I crossed that milestone, and then they leave it and then they come back. And then when they're looking through it, they're like, oh my gosh, what did I write? There's always that just kind of like just gut punch of like, oh man. But it's so cool to see as it progresses, like how it improves over time and how it becomes more of a seamless story. I guess, do you have a pattern of how you go through editing? Like first draft, messy draft, second draft, maybe development edits, or anything on that front?
I don't tend to do like development edits, dialogue edits separately. I tend to do the whole thing as one. Like if it doesn't make sense, I just edit the whole thing. I think I should probably go through and do a dialogue edit, because sometimes I've got characters who are quite brutish going, well, my dear, I don't know if I believe in that. And it's like, no, they don't talk like that. Or I've got like eloquent, like Dr. Asclepius is my main mentor in the books after the first one. And if I had him say, no, I disagree, then he wouldn't say that. He would say, I would politely like to decline to answer this question, blah, 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 blah. So he would speak in a very elaborate way. So I do have to go back and check that they've done that. I think I don't tend to do that as part of my process, but I think that's something I need to incorporate, just to check that everyone's speech and tone is on point and nobody sounds like a carbon copy of somebody else. Because I do tend to write speech the way I speak. And I go, but that's not how that character speaks. So I do go through. I tend to, so on my first draft, obviously it's a heavy edit, moving scenes and chopping scenes and cutting things and adding things. So it's the draft at the end looks like this big wad of paper and post-it notes and all sorts of things. I promise I'm not on commission. And and then the second draft, it looks more, it tends to look more tidy. It's usually covered in editing ink, but this draft has got rewrites pinned in as well, so I write those on paper, because I think if it didn't come out right on the computer, then I need to try and write it by hand and see if slowing it down, because I type pretty fast, and so if I slow it down, hopefully that makes it come out better. So the messy draft gets lots of edits, and then the second draft tends to have less edits, and then when I've got to a point where I'm only changing the odd word here and there, that's when I go, I think I'm done and I need to put it down now, because I'm only changing a word. So, yeah. But then when I read the proof copy, no, it's not the proof copy. When I read the published copy, I'm going, oh, I would have changed that. I would have put something different there.
Yeah, that's tough, eh? Like it's the challenge of a writer and an artist and creative in general is the art and work is never truly done. You just kind of have to say, all right, I'm going to leave it alone now and just kind of not touch it again. I guess you mentioned a little bit. Do you read your stories to your kids? These ones, or just the holiday one?
All of them. I read everything that I've written to the children. And I sometimes get, Mom, you've read us that bit before. Because they are my guinea pigs. I haven't read Edge of Time to them yet, because I wanted it to be as perfect as I could get it at that point before I read it to them. Because sometimes when I'm reading out loud to the children, And I do read my books at work as well. And sometimes when I'm reading out loud, I go, "Oh, I've just told you something. You didn't know that." So that needs to appear a lot earlier in the book because I've just assumed knowledge here that you don't have. So reading it aloud helps me to identify bits like that. Even if I've put the book down for a weekend and then picked it up in the week again, it really helps me to spot those errors by reading it to somebody because I'm kind of seeing it in my head the way that they're seeing it, and they're not seeing it clearly because I haven't written it clearly. So it really helps me to identify those mistakes. My own children are very vocal, and they'll say, "Mummy, I don't like it when he does that," or "I don't agree that this has happened, and you should do it like this." So then that helps me like gauge, because sometimes I want to annoy them, right? You want to annoy your readers a little bit because it makes them want to read, but not too much. So I try to gauge from their response how it is, and they let me know if it's too scary as well. I have gone back and done a rewrite because my children have been like, "Mummy, I don't like this at all. It's too scary." So I've gone back and done it. But the books that they love the most are the books that I haven't published yet, and I haven't shared the title or anything. It's my Ben and Bella books. They absolutely love those books. They're sort of pitched in the middle of Tasha's Christmas Wish and Lexi Walker, so a little bit younger than Lexi Walker. And they absolutely love those. They said, "When's the next one coming?" I was going, "Well, it takes a long time to write, darling, so you have to hang on a minute." So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I wrote that one in while I was leaving Lexi Walker to the side for a bit. Um, so I like to juggle projects. It's because I'm not, I don't know, a bit insane. I don't know. So juggling projects is tricky. But so I did that, and I wrote that, and I read it to them while I was writing it. So it was a very rough first draft, and normally I don't do that, but I quite liked it. So I just read to them, and they really liked it. So I think once it's been edited, I'm really looking forward to getting that one out. But I think Lexi Walker comes first because I want to
Mm.
get it all perfect.
I dig that. I have to say I'm a little jealous. I mean, I guess it's by choice, but I haven't been able to read many of my stories because I write like adult fiction, and the most recent one that I had
Yeah.
was specifically like a grim dark fantasy, and I'm like, when you're 20, you may be able to read this story. Uh,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
grimdark's my favourite genre to read. I do love a grimdark.
Oh, excellent.
They're
Well,
pretty
maybe
good.
I'll send you a copy there. But yeah, no, I appreciate you taking time to talk to me today. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that people either may not know about you or you'd like to highlight personally?
I am very passionate about bedtime stories for children, and I'm trying to promote that through my website and through some of my reels on Instagram, saying how valuable it is for children to read at bedtime, to have that one-to-one alone time with an adult. Whoever reads, or even if you look at the pages and look at the pictures in the books, it doesn't matter. It's the act of sharing a book with children, and it makes such a difference. Children who are read to, sorry, this is my soapbox moment here, sorry, so feel free to cut this out, but children who read at home with an adult start school with over 250,000 words in their vocabulary. And children who don't read bedtime stories, well, it doesn't have to be at bedtime, but children who don't read stories with parents at home start school with 4,000 words. And it's something that we can do that's just so easy. It only takes 10 minutes just to read a quick book with your child, and it's such a benefit. So if I can promote anything, I would promote reading bedtime stories with your child at any time during the day. But I say bedtime because that's when I like to read with my children.
Gosh, that's a what a selfless thing for you to do that because most people, when I ask that question, usually plug their website or their upcoming book. But instead, you decide
Oh,
to, which is incredible. You're making me get emotional. You decide to share something that's important to you, and I'll echo that. Of like I've watched as my kids grow up of how important of a time it is, and like I actually, even when I'm busy, even when stuff is a little hectic, trying to make that time important because it's like yeah, it's so crazy to me because like to me I'm like whatever, it's just reading a book, it's like not a big deal, but to them it's such a huge experience, and they're like
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to put into words, but
Yeah.
you put it really well. And yeah, I echo that 1,000%. So if people are looking for something to read with their kids, definitely check out Frances's work. I'll leave links in the description. You can check out her work, especially because at the time of this episode, it might be around the holiday season. So you could pick up an awesome holiday book as well. Or if you like to explore some sci-fi, check out the Lexi Walker series. You won't be
Thank
disappointed.
you.
Yeah, but thanks again for taking some time to talk to us, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
And thank you for inviting me.
Happy to have you.